Hello, you're listening to On the Payroll, my podcast about project management, consulting, best practices around project delivery on platforms such as Salesforce or Microsoft CE, on themes such as leadership, team building. In fact, it's really just an opportunity for me to talk about things that I like with people who have common interests with me. And along the way, I hope that my listeners get to learn a few things from our conversation as well. In today's episode, I speak to Caimin McGovern, who is a customer services director at Salesforce. And we have such an interesting conversation about the role of customer services director, in helping organizations leverage the use of Salesforce. And in this conversation in particular, he uncovers the one key thing that almost every company makes a mistake on. So I hope you'll stay and listen and find out what that one key thing is. I talk about it a lot in my writing anyway, and I think you'll find this very, very useful. Enjoy. Hello, Caimin. Hi there. Welcome to my podcast. It's called On the Payroll. How are you today?
I'm extremely well, thank you. Delighted to be here. And I know we've been talking about it for a while, so delighted we got the chance to get it done.
Thank you also for jumping through the hoops to get the necessary approval. So I'm quite looking forward to our conversation. Shall I begin by saying that I'm really quite interested in your career path? So why don't we start there? And if you can just carry myself and the listeners on your journey, because I know you started off in QA, as I can see from your profile.
That's right.
To where you've got to today.
Yeah, it's funny, I was thinking recently, I'm the greatest stroke of luck that I have in my life is that there is a role that enables me to use my talents, which are a little bit vague and a little bit not well defined, but I think they fit this role really well. So I started off, I kind of drifted into IT. I left school in 1992, not really sure about what I wanted to do, but I always had a real interest in computing. In terms of, I started off with a Commodore 64. I had an Acer computer back in the day, which cost a huge amount of money. 386 with I think 4 megabytes of RAM. But I always enjoyed tinkering with things and seeing how things worked. So I started in IT doing computer science, and when I left college I had a role for about 8 months as a developer in a very, very small company, but it was very rigid in terms of the work that I was doing. So I applied for a role for a company that produced X400 messaging software. So this was, I guess, the precursor to email. It was secure message transmission, but it gave me the opportunity to work on a ton of different operating systems and transport protocols as they were then. It wasn't just TCP/IP, which I really enjoyed. The role that I had there was in QA, which I loved. I loved kind of getting software and just bashing it to see, could I make it break or could I find holes in it? But one of the things that I really enjoyed doing was we would have customers that would come into the lab to see, how we tested the software. And I really liked giving tours and explaining the process and, explaining how we did our role. So after about a year, I actually started working in the development arm of the company that I was working for, but I didn't enjoy it as much as the QA because it was primarily bug fixes, very kind of focused, and you'd be working on one issue for a long period of time. So I had an opportunity to move into technical support, and that was where I really started to enjoy working with customers, different problems every day, quite complex problems sometimes, really getting the bit between your teeth and trying to reproduce issues and working on them. So I started then to move from technical support into a more technical consulting role. The software that the company produced was white label messaging software. If you have an ISP account in the UK with TalkTalk or BT, more than likely the email address you get with that was that company software. So I would go and help their technical support teams get set up for supporting their customers, and through that then got into technical training, and that was maybe 5 or 10 years. Starting in 2013, I started to really travel all around the world, doing training courses and training classes, and working with technical teams to teach them how the software worked and how to support it. I really liked the aspect of explaining technical concepts to people. And while I was working with primarily technical teams, I was also working with some non-technical people, let's say people, support managers who may not necessarily be technical. And if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I have in a nutshell, my passion is making technical concepts accessible to non-technical people. So I started doing technical training in about 2005. And in 2013, I had the opportunity to interview for a role as a customer success manager, which I hadn't really heard about, but it was explained to me that it was like a combination of technical support and business support and enablement, which sounded perfect. So I joined Salesforce in 2013, actually had my 8-year anniversary on Monday. And I've been kind of working there ever since. So I started off working with smaller customers all around Europe, moved into a role that we had called a portfolio success manager, where I worked with specific sales teams. So worked with some really interesting brands in the UK in terms of retail. So Chanel and Liverpool Football Club, Manchester City, which was, really interesting. And then in October of last year, I secured a role as a customer success manager, so a dedicated success resource for customers based primarily in South Africa, Turkey, and the Middle East. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Wow, I have made quite a lot of notes, and I want to touch on different things. So I was just thinking that how you started is very similar to mine, because my first computer was an Acer as well, but it was a 286. I didn't have a Commodore. So, things have come a long way since then. And the fact that you started off as QA, right? So I've got a question about that. Do you feel that anyone can be a good tester? Are they born or bred? Sorry.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think that anyone can be a QA engineer. I definitely don't, because I think you need to have a particular mindset. You need to be curious, and you need to be to not have if you're a QA engineer and you just work through a series of tests, all you're ever going to find are issues that were reported before. You really need to be able to look at a product and think about how it could be used. I think QA and technical support go hand in hand, because I remember back in my first job, and I think this is a bit of an apocryphal tale, everybody says it, but I was dealing with somebody on the phone and they said they couldn't see a particular form. So I said, okay, if you close down all the windows, just see, is it on your desktop? And there was a long pause. And he came back and said, okay, I've shut all the windows, I've closed all the blinds, I still can't see it. And I thought, okay, this is something that's, completely obvious to me, but this is not a technical person. This is it was a freight company. He's a driver. He doesn't understand what I'm saying. And I think that if you need to understand that mindset when you're testing a piece of software, to look at all of the different ways that it could be used. So I don't think there sometimes is a perception, particularly in manual QA, that kind of anybody can do it. I definitely don't think that that's the case. I think that you do need to have an understanding of how the software hangs together, an understanding of how people use software, and, as I say, like a curious mindset that you can go in and just bash it all different ways and see what happens.
So in your current role, what do you tell customers about QA testing?
Again, it's that message of making assumptions is a dangerous thing. The one thing that I would say as well is when I work with customers who are rolling out implementations within their own org, typically the customers that I'm working with, they have worked with that implementation for a long period of time before their end users ever get their hands on it. So it's very easy to make assumptions about how things will work. And so user acceptance testing, for example, is a great way of finding out where the holes are in the implementation and where the gaps are, in terms of if somebody looks at a screen and it's not completely obvious to them what they should do, it's the designer's fault rather than the user's fault. So I would always say, don't make assumptions. Understand that you have lived in this product for a lot longer than the user will have. And so there are things that you know about the product that they won't know. But if they don't know what they need to know, it's never going to work. So, it's listen to feedback. The one thing that frustrates me as well is when somebody gives feedback about a product, and this would always happen in QA, where you'd say to a developer, if I do this, the results aren't what I expected. And the developer would say, oh yeah, but nobody's going to do that. Or, oh no, that's fine. That's not a big deal. The problem is that this is the way that it's been designed. And if it isn't easy and intuitive for the user to use, you basically have a really expensive screensaver. You're not fulfilling the purpose that the software was written to do. And that's the big problem.
So as you're talking, actually, my mind was going on to slightly different places, mainly because there are quite a few nuances in there. So let me just tease them out for our listeners. Where I come from is from a consulting partner point of view. So we take a product. So my background was Microsoft as well. So like you, was in infrastructure, databases, and then Microsoft CRM before I moved over to Salesforce. So as a partner, we're taking a product that this company has built and we're implementing it for you. So the QA that I have always worked with has been in this environment. So there are things that you test and things that you don't. You don't test list views, which are default from Salesforce because they've already done their testing and QA and stuff. And what we test is what we build. So from what you're talking about, it's more from Salesforce point of view, right? So you got your testers and then you got your developers who build the features that are in the backlog, etc., that Salesforce wants to roll out every release and so on and so forth. So when you're talking to your customers in your role as customer success director, I would imagine that you will have some customers who self-enable. So they've got their own team. And then you've got those who work with partners. Mm-hmm. So if you kind of put that hat on, so I believe when you were answering a question earlier, you were looking inward internally into Salesforce and talking about your QA in that way. But if you're talking to your customers and wanting to impress upon them the importance of good testing so that they get the best out of Salesforce, what are the kind of things that you would say, let's say to someone who's self-enabling and someone who's working with a partner, just on the topic of QA and testing?
Well, in terms of, let's say when somebody is if they're self-implementing or they're working with a partner, particularly when they're working with a partner, I always say the more knowledge about the platform you have, the better your experience will be. And that's not to denigrate any work that any partner would do. The challenge is that it's like me with cars. I know zero about cars. I know how to turn them on, how to make them operate. But once I lift the bonnet, I'm done. If I go into a garage and the man in the garage says, you need this work done, or the woman in the garage says, you need this work done, all I can do is take them at face value. And if I've never worked or never put my car in that garage before, I literally have no idea whether what they're telling me is absolutely vital, whether it's something that I could consider but doesn't really matter if I don't do it, or whether it's something that will directly impact my safety, right? So particularly with Salesforce, there's an awful lot of information that you can get sometimes it's overwhelming, but there are now, guided trails through product enablement. And the more you know about how the product works, the more specific your requirements can be. One thing that I always say to customers is if you go to, say, for example, the admin trail on Trailhead, and even if you're never going to be an admin, but you learn what features like workflows do or what validation rules do, you don't necessarily have to know how to implement those things, but you do know that that feature exists in Salesforce. So you can then take your business problems and describe them in a way where you say, for example, I want to enter something in a field, but I want to make sure that it has a specific dial code. If you don't know that that feature exists in Salesforce, you're relying on the partner to ask that question. And if they don't ask that question, that feature will never be implemented, and it becomes technical debt, because then you have poor data or you have a feature gap. So it really is, in terms of QA and testing in Salesforce, the one thing I would say is to be patient, to make sure that at the testing phase, you take your time and you're not as focused as we have a release date. I think if you're using the agile approach, then a smaller release where it's fully tested and fully up to spec is better than a larger one where you think there are things to do in that. And there's two things that I would say around that. So the first is, if you release a product where there is still work to be done, realistically, that work will never get done. The second thing is, you will come under pressure to hit release dates and to hit release targets. But if the challenge that I see is, it's a lot easier to get somebody to use a product for the first time than it is for the second time. If the user experience isn't good the first time that they go and use a particular product, it's really difficult to get them to go back. Even if you've made a raft of changes, the perception is this isn't fit for purpose, or it's 90% of what we need, but the other 10% is still in spreadsheets or external systems. So I need to keep using those external systems. So really, in terms of QA and testing and user acceptance testing, it's to be patient, to understand what it is that you're trying to do, have a really clear vision of what it is that you want to achieve, and focus on that and getting it right before you try and go out. The cliche in Salesforce is don't boil the ocean, and that is, really sound advice.
So you were talking about agile. So that's kind of one of my favorite topics in terms of methodology. If you get a client who's trying to do a big transformation, have you seen one where agile really works?
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell me?
To go across, it always, I wouldn't say that it always works, but in every digital transformation project that works, agile is used. And the reason is, when I started in IT, we used waterfall, and it was really a case of, you'd sit down, you'd have your planning meeting, the developers would go away for 3 to 6 months,
yep,
and then present you with a feature at the end. The challenges with a big transformation project is that you need to keep everybody moving forward with you. And we get to a stage where, and everybody gets it in everything, where a lot of change is required. Right in the middle of that project, you get to the stage where you don't remember why you started it, and you can't see where the end line is. And the great thing about agile is, at any point in that process, you can say, we'll pause it here, and we'll take what we have, and we'll really bed that in, and then we'll move forward. We'll expand the MVP. The other thing about agile is that I think it's really important, and this is one of the things that I'll say around executive sponsorship. In any change program, you really need to have an executive sponsor or a change champion who can articulate the reason. If we use the ProSci model, the ADCAR, why are we making this change? What are the benefits that it's going to give us? What do you need to do to be able to successfully implement this change? it's much easier to do that with an agile framework, because the rate of change is slower. But also, a lot of the change that I would see in agile is we get a product, we get feedback from the user base who say, I love 90% of this, but there's 10% of it that doesn't work. And in a lot of cases, then we can make those changes. And in the next release, we see those changes implemented. And now I love 92% of it, and there's only 8% that doesn't work for me. The big benefit of that as well is that, speaking from a Salesforce point of view, Salesforce generally isn't the first system that's been implemented in any of the customers that I'm working with. Generally, they're changing from an in-house product or a different, Microsoft or SAP or whatever. And you get this concept of change fatigue. Here we go again. We've been 3 years since the last system. Now we're changing again. I'm going to use this for 2 years, and then there'll be another change. When you use Agile, you get your MVP, you start to use it, but you can also see how it's maybe expanding or it's adapting to the user changes, and it reinforces that concept that this is the system of choice, this is the system of record for my organization. Investment is going in. I understand why these changes are made. And even on a subconscious basis, it reinforces that message that this is what we're going to be using going forward. So it's really important to understand how it works and to get on board with it. So it really helps with adoption as well when you use, I think, an agile framework.
Okay, thank you for that. There's quite a lot there, and I would really like to unpack it with your help, please. Also, I'm feeling slightly in a pedantic mood, so I just need your assistance slightly. So, coming from a Microsoft implementation when I was there, was very waterfall, but our projects weren't 2 years, 3 years in length. They were a little bit shorter and easier to manage expectations. And so the delivery of the features were not so far away that, as you say, you get fatigued. So when am I going to see the final product? So I saw it when I was looking at it, and when I was shifting from Microsoft to Salesforce, and I was, I took my certification, for Agile and DSCM and all of that. I was very open-minded, and I was trying to, I wanted to buy into it. I wanted to, because Salesforce was going on about Agile so much, and I was immersed in it in the partner that I worked in, I realized the definition of Agile that I had learned wasn't being executed in the way the purists have envisaged it. And so from my point of view, Agile, so if we looked at the manifesto and looked at all the principles, and I get that, I totally get the benefits of it. But one of the principles is you spoke about MVP, which is constantly providing value to the client. I also see that. But the other thing was that you're supposed to ship every sprint. Every sprint you're supposed to deploy to production. Now, in the company I was with, in all the other large Salesforce implementation that I heard, some of my team was seconded into the larger transformation. They weren't doing that.
Yeah.
They weren't shipping at the end of every sprint. What I'm understanding, again, I'm just drilling down to details, is that you were working in sprints or iterations, but not deploying to production until there was a coherent piece that you thought this will provide best value, and then you deploy. So in my head, that was more like a mini waterfall with iterative development, and then you delivered it in very structured way that was complete. Because in my head, and I've worked on a few larger transformation projects, you had to work with external vendors, and therefore you cannot keep changing, and you still needed a plan. So how I've been training people and how I saw things was that the only true agile methodology in the way that I've understood it, which is shipping every whatever your sprint is, belongs more for a software company where you had all these features you wanted to do, you prioritize them, and you push them out, you test them, and etc. Whereas when you're doing transformation programs, when you're implementing as a partner, true agile is something that most customers don't get.
Yeah.
And most
Yeah.
partners aren't able to execute in the way that it was envisaged in the beginning. So this is what I'm trying to, just get clarity on. And if you say that you've been on large transformation projects where agile has really worked, I would love to hear a little bit more whether it is like a pure agile way of delivering or a bit more like mini waterfalls, mini waves of feature that's been bundled together in a sensible manner.
Yeah, that it's an excellent point. And one of the words, the key words that you use there is pure, pure agile. And I've worked with Scrum Masters and agile trainers who will always say the best agile is, or the best way of implementing agile is the way that works for your organization. And I think, that's exactly right in terms of you have your overall vision, which is more of a waterfall. You have your product deliveries, which maybe, and the sprint may be 3 months, right? Or it could be 6 months. But I think the concept of agile that works really well is that continuous improvement and continuous development, along with, I do think that it's important to not necessarily to ship at the end of every sprint, but to ship in increments or to deploy in increments where, like I say, you don't want to boil the ocean and you don't want to give a complete brand new product where everything is changed. Although I have seen that work as well. A lot of the customers that I wouldn't necessarily have been involved with myself, but that I've seen would be multi-country. I'll give you maybe a contrasting example. So 2 customers that I'm aware of had multi-country rollouts. One decided that what they were going to do was ship the same version to every country and then iterate or increment in every country all at the same time. The other took the approach that they were going to prioritize the country list and they were going to start with the smaller countries and they were going to roll out to a single country and then make any iterations, make any improvements that needed, and then take that completed version and roll it out to the second country. And I think by far what was the easiest to do was the second approach, where it was a single country at a time, because it was much more manageable. It was much more, there were far fewer variables in terms of personnel and, as you mentioned, external influences, or if you like, external dependencies. And really by the end of it, so there was 8 countries involved in that rollout. And by the end of it, it was such a smooth process of rollout to one country. And this was including Marketing Cloud. Basically just copy what was deployed in that country, roll it into the next country. And then once that implementation had been finished, any improvements that were made or any changes that had been made were rolled back into the previous countries and then bundled up and taken as the base platform for the next country. So, I think you definitely have to be adaptable. And as you say, this adherence to pure agile is probably going to be too inflexible for most. Also, these can be complex projects that aren't just software based, they're also people based, and we can never really predict how people are going to react. So if you say, look, the software is done, we've rolled it out, it's now time to move on to the next, without looking at how that's gone down with the product that's already out there, it's a bit of a challenge. One of the things that we do as customer success is we look and we focus on adoption numbers. So not just in terms of how many licenses are deployed, how many licenses are being used, but also what features are being used. Is there a reason that, for example, a new feature hasn't landed well? So yeah, I think, as I say, pure agile is not great, but I don't know of too many companies or projects that would adhere to pure agile now. It's more of a hybrid model, I think.
I think that makes a lot of sense to roll it out in a way that works for that customer. Sorry, it's just really interested in the way that you've said rolling back as a kind of base template for the original company. Did you get to a position where by the time you got to the 8th one, that the changes that had to be rolled back was so different that you needed retraining? Was there any element of that, or?
No, actually, as the delta between, say, country 1 and 2 was quite large. There wasn't really, I think, any kind of fundamental changes. It was more just process tweaks and things like that. But in that particular project, by the time they got to, say, country 7 of 8, the changes between 7 and 8 were very, very small. Primarily language changes and very few feature changes or process changes, because they had now a large body of evidence from the previous countries of what worked and what landed well and what the market needed. It was essentially the same business, but just it was over Eastern Europe, so multiple kind of, let's say, former satellite states, so very similar in terms of culture and process. So yeah, it was quite minimal by the time they got to the end, I would say.
Did you, I know going a teeny bit, maybe more technical here, but is there a situation where you've got clients? So obviously the sizes of the projects that I've worked on never got to a point where we had to look at more than one org for the same company. Do you have clients who have got multiple orgs, and how do they handle? Okay.
Yeah. So there's obviously different reasons why customers might have different orgs. In particular, mergers and acquisitions are a big challenge, I would say, or separation of data. Some customers might want to use an instance of Sales Cloud and a separate instance of Service Cloud, and maybe have an integration between the two. Tends to be for historical reasons. I think the Salesforce has evolved so that we have this concept of the customer 360, and I think the value in Salesforce now is primarily this 360-degree view of the customer. So for mergers and acquisitions, that would be the primary use case where you have multiple orgs. And I think the key is, well, really it depends, right? So there is no requirement for you to have a single org. There's obviously advantages to that, but only if all of the processes are broadly similar. If the data is able to be shared across the entire org, which isn't always the case. I'm thinking of a retail group that I worked with in the UK who had a really strong business objective of basically just buying up smaller competitors and rolling them up into their org. They decided to go for a single org strategy, but they had a real problem in terms of separating data between the various different brands that they own, because they didn't want somebody from brand 1 seeing data from brand 2. So as they added more and more orgs, obviously sharing rules became more complex, performance started to be impacted. And that was, I think, probably not the right strategy for them at the time. I also have organizations who are going the other way. So one organization that have multiple orgs where they've just migrated everything into a single org. It's allowing them to be a little bit more agile in terms of their selling process and do things like cross-selling. Some multiple different similar services in terms of professional services and software sales. But there was a lot of effort involved in that. It was a slow process and it's not completed yet. So I think they've got maybe one more external org that they are looking to bring in. It's really just about communication. The challenge as well becomes, and particularly in a merger and acquisition scenario, is who is the owner of the data? Because you have two people at kind of similar levels from the two different companies where there may be conflicting opinions, and the overall strategy is can we all just get along? realistically somebody needs to be the owner. So there's a lot of communication involved, and a lot of, let's see what the broad strategy is. And if I can plug our expert coaching sessions, we do have an org strategy coaching session, which is specifically for customers that have multiple orgs and are looking to integrate them. So which processes get implemented, which processes get dropped, who has the master set of data. It's quite a complex arrangement. And it really depends on what your overall objective is, and careful analysis of the pros and cons of each approach, I would say.
That's really cool. I've not heard of the coaching services that you speak of.
Yeah, so for anybody who has a Premier account or a Premier success plan, last year we had these engagements that were called accelerators. And the idea is to accelerate your path to business value. So these are small focused consulting sessions with product specialists in our success hub. And they basically work with you to achieve a specific outcome. So if you go to help.salesforce.com, you'll see a list of the accelerators that are available. And when I'm describing them to customers, I say there are things like, how to build reports and dashboards, how to use opportunities in the best possible way. But there are also things for experienced admins, like how to build a governance framework, how to define your org strategy. And these really are useful for those more tenured admins that have a lot of product experience, but really are looking for advice on where should we go next and what should our strategy be, because we use the great advantage of being in customer success is you work with so many different customers and you hear so many different stories. So when I engage with a new customer, the value that I bring is I can teach you the mistakes that everybody else has made and make sure that you're aware of them so that you can avoid them. And that's really what we do in those expert coaching sessions as well. This is the best practice that we've gathered from years of working with customers very similar to yourself,
So that segues quite nicely to my next question. What are the top 5 mistakes that most customers do that you have to, keep coaching and keep re-explaining to new customers?
I can boil it down to one top mistake. Okay. So if we were, when we talk about adoption in Salesforce and we talk about why a Salesforce implementation hasn't gone well, if I engage with a customer who says, look, we've got a lot of technical debt, we have a lot of duplicated data, the processes don't really work, we've got a ton of fields that were implemented and we don't really know why. Those are all symptoms of the same problem. And the same problem is always, nearly always anyway, it's a lack of executive sponsorship. And it's a lack of clear executive sponsorship from somebody in the org who is driving the adoption of Salesforce. I would often talk to customers, and in my previous role when I worked with much smaller customers, this was a particularly prevalent issue. I would talk to a customer and I would say, so who is your executive sponsor? And they tell me who it was, and it might be the person that I was speaking to, or it might be their boss, like a CIO, CTO, or whatever it might be. And when I would talk to that person and say, so people regard you as the executive sponsor for this project, most of the time they would say, I guess that would be me, yeah. So what do you do as an executive sponsor? Well, it's my role to really promote the usage of Salesforce. And I'd say, okay, so what is it that you specifically do to drive the adoption of Salesforce? And that's when the conversation gets a little bit stilted, because it's one of the things that I add are these insights that are simple but not obvious. When you tell somebody to do, you could do this or you could do that, they go, it's incredibly simple. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. It's because it's not your job to think about that kind of thing. It's my job to tell you. So these simple but not obvious tips. The way that I describe it is so in Ireland, we have these huge weddings, and after the dinner, the band starts or the disco starts, and we have this phenomenon of the empty dance floor. So everybody's standing around the dance floor. Everybody wants to dance, but nobody wants to be the first person. And you always have that first person, usually with a couple of drinks on them, who'll go in, and once they go, everybody will follow them. And that's the role of the executive sponsor, or one of the primary roles of the executive sponsor. In order for an implementation to be successful, you need to have a clear vision. Okay, you need to have, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And you need to have somebody who can articulate that at every level. So as an example, when Salesforce launched Chatter, which, a couple of years ago, or a good few years ago now actually, but so everybody had access to this new tool. And if anybody who's used Chatter will know, it's kind of like Twitter in that you go in, you add a photograph of yourself, you add a little note in your bio, but nobody knew how to use it, and nobody wanted to be the person who used it in the wrong way in front of the entire company. So Mark Benioff chattered all of his execs, all of his directs, and said, I want you by the end of business today or by this week to update your profile picture, and I want you to get all of your directs to do it as well. And so within 24 hours, almost the entire company had their profile picture on. And now when somebody starts in Salesforce and they don't do it, one of the first things that somebody will say to them is, oh, by the way, you should update your profile picture on Chatter. If I was brand new to Salesforce and I had started in, whether it's in Salesforce or in another org, and I logged into Chatter and I saw a sea of profiles that had no profile picture updated, the first thought that would be in my head is, I'm probably not really supposed to do this, and I'll just follow the crowd. Okay, it's the same with everything. If I see an opportunity that I have some insights on because I've worked with this customer in a previous role, should I mention that? If nobody else is saying anything on an opportunity, is it the done thing? You have an executive sponsor who will come in and they will facilitate that. They will lead by example. So your executive sponsor will be encouraging sales managers to use sales reports to run their sales meeting. They will be connecting people between. It doesn't necessarily need to be the CTO, but it may be people within the organization who are highly visible. They will push for duplication rules to be implemented. They will be reviewing the data to see, are there challenges in the data? Are we starting to see incomplete data? And what should we do about that? So, when you say what are the top 5 mistakes, the top one mistake is you don't have an executive sponsor, or you do have an executive sponsor who doesn't know what their role is or what they should be doing. And once you identify that, 95% of the other 4 mistakes go away, because you then have a culture within your organization of best practice in Salesforce.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So on that particular note, so I would think that when you see a customer who does not have an executive sponsorship, what do you tell them? You've got to appoint one, or sorry, go on.
Yeah. So the executive sponsor doesn't need to be the person who's doing the day-to-day example building in Salesforce, but they do need to be somebody who has the visibility and the authority within the organization to make change happen. Okay. What I would say to them is the first thing that I would say to a customer is, why did you implement Salesforce? Now, when you deal with a customer who's brand new to Salesforce, it's amazing because they're super enthusiastic. They have a very clear understanding of why Salesforce was brought in. But 90% of the time, the customers that I speak with are not the people who signed the order form for Salesforce. And they may be 2 or 3 generations removed from the person who did. So, and particularly when I was working with smaller customers and you would say, why did you implement Salesforce? The answer would be something like, I don't really know. It was before my time. And it was, I think it was to help with sales, or, because we have this service organization, we record all our cases in Salesforce. So what I would then ask them to do is to take a step back. Let's not think about Salesforce. Let's think about what you as an organization are trying to achieve. Whether it's, increase your profit margin, if it's reduce the time it takes you to answer a call, increase customer satisfaction. What are your KPIs? And in Salesforce, we have the process called a business value map, where we take these KPIs that a company is trying to to work towards. And then we start to break them down into, okay, let's say it's increased profits. How are you looking to do that? Is it to upsell to your existing customers, to widen your customer base? Is it to improve cross-selling, implement new products? And we start to get into the detail of that. And from there, we start to look at what are the metrics that we can track. So if you want to increase your customer base, how many leads are you generating? How many of those leads are being converted? What's the opportunity win rate for those converted leads? Then we start to look at what are the processes in Salesforce that will actually help you to attain those. So, we have opportunity management, lead management, reporting, all of that kind of stuff. And based on that, we can actually build a dashboard. So we've moved away from Salesforce is a product that I have to use along with Outlook and Excel and whatever else you might be using. My goal is to get my customers open Salesforce at the start of their day and say, the information that I can see on the screen determines how I spend my day, right? That for me is optimal usage of Salesforce, where they look at the data and they make decisions on how to spend their day based on that information. So the business value map helps those executive sponsors to understand how Salesforce connects back in. And I should say as well, any CRM or any software system you can use this process for. How does this actually help in helping an organization achieve their goals? Because if let's say we define, I need to increase my the amount of leads, then we start to have a conversation around where are you getting your leads from? What is the data quality of the leads that you're bringing in? How can we improve that? And that translates directly into action. So if I'm a marketing manager, how can I evaluate the quality of leads I'm getting? And what can I do if I see that it's dropping below a particular threshold? So it's like, it's simple but not obvious. I can say to somebody, we do a simple lead scoring system. We look at the fields that we definitely require in a lead, and we score the lead based on that. So if a lead falls below that score, this is the action that you need to take or that you could take. If a lead is above a certain score, you recognize that person for consistently entering quality data. And then other people see that and it leads by example. So the main conversation, it's not really to force people to use the product that they have. It's let's take a step back, see what you're trying to achieve as an organization, and potentially, Salesforce, the implementation that you have will help, or maybe we need to make some changes. But if I talk to a customer and I say, you need to do this body of work to bring your implementation up to best practice standard, without explaining why they're doing it, they're just not going to do it, right? The main reaction that customers will give is apathy, particularly if there's no downside. So I know I need to do some work. I don't really know how to start it. I don't really know how to approach it. What happens if I don't do it? If the company goes out of business, yes, I'm motivated. But the reality is most companies will say, well, we'll get to the end of our contract and we'll go in another direction. We'll get a smaller CRM, or we'll get a different CRM. And I know this is a really long answer, but I see a lot of the challenges where customers think that it's a product issue rather than a cultural issue. And in customer success, when we describe the role we do, we often use a medical analogy, right? Customers come to us, they explain what their problems are. We diagnose their issue. We write a prescription, which may be, talk to a partner or do this expert coaching session or install this app, or we redirect them to a specialist, like an architect. In reality, we're more like a gym, because if the customer doesn't come to us in their world, nothing really changes. They carry on with a suboptimal platform, but that's been okay for the last 3 or 4 years. So as a customer success manager, it's my role to say, you have this opportunity. If you take it really slowly, we're not going to talk about, losing 20 kilos or, gaining a load of muscle overnight. It's a long, slow process. The problem becomes then when the customer says, as I have done so many times in my life. I've joined a gym and gone, the opening hours aren't really suitable for me. So I let my subscription expire, and then I'll find a gym that's open when I can go early in the morning or late at night, or the equipment isn't great, or I don't like the music that they play. The problem isn't the gym. The problem is the gym goer, i.e. me. And when you look at a CRM or I think any software system and say the product isn't a good fit for us, I mean, maybe that's fair, but 9 times out of 10, it's a cultural thing. You're not suitably motivated to make the changes that you need to make because you don't understand the benefits that you can get from making those changes.
Oh my goodness. I feel that a part 2 is in order, because out of all that answer, the long answer that you provided, there's so many things I would like to unpack, but I want to be very respectful of your time. And I did say that was going to be 45 minutes.
Yeah, sorry, I tend to ramble, particularly when I get onto that type of topic, because it's to me anyway, it's really fascinating. It's all about, human psychology and things like that. So yeah, I'd be delighted to do a part 2 if you'd like to. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's why I didn't stop you, because I was just, I was with you all the way. So why don't we plan a second one? Because I really want to unpack that particular answer basically and delve into a bit more detail. And I just want to thank you again for your time today. That was really cool. I had a bunch of questions which I would like an opportunity to touch on the next time. So really appreciate that. I think you've given our callers, at least for this particular episode, an insight into what you do, and the answer that you provided, which was the one thing, which was the executive sponsorship. It just a little bit blew my mind, because I had a whole list. That was one of it. It didn't occur to me that it was actually the main one, out of which everything else flowed until you said it. So that was really, really insightful. Thank you very much. I appreciated that very much.
My pleasure.
Okay, let's organize second one sometime soon. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Caimin.
Thanks very much. That was a pleasure.
Likewise.